Welcome back to Oncology for the Inquisitive Mind. My name's Josh. That's my co-host Michael, and you're here as we continue our sojourn in the world of metastatic colorectal cancer. Michael, we're recording at evening tonight because I've been on call the last week. How are you?
I am good, Josh. Yes, it is late night oncology for the Inquisitive Mind, so I think we have to do this whole episode with our late night radio voices.
Yes. And this is love song dedications. If you could send through your request to inquisitiveonc@gmail.com or give us 5 stars and we'll play a beautiful Sinatra for you.
This study goes out to Cheryl. Thanks for calling in, Cheryl. Here is the Sunlight study.
Rather than Sinatra, rather than Sinatra.
rather than Sinatra, we're going to talk about chemotherapy because, there's nothing that says love like poison.
Except in this case, cancer. So colorectal cancer is still one of the most common cancers, and 50% will progress to metastatic disease, of those 5-year survival rate is 15%, which is abysmal. We are always searching for that next line in therapy, and this is another targeted episode because, as we've said previously, chemotherapy is the backbone, but what do you do when there is no more chemotherapy options? Today, I have to say though, Michael, you are my sunlight, so I'll let you take it away.
I'm just thinking because I know the study that you're going to do. The audience obviously doesn't unless they happen to look at the episode description. So they might. I'm just going to be spending most of the next little while trying to think of an adequate segue for your study. But yes, sunlight. Sunlight we shall talk about. And yes, so late line therapies, unfortunately, as Josh said, these are therapies that are going to be part of most people's journeys when they have metastatic colorectal cancer because the options do run out. And unlike, say, breast cancer, they do run out fairly quickly after the old 5FU-based options are exhausted. And I think with both of these studies, Josh, I think it's fair to say that if you are thinking or if you're at the point with one of your patients where you need to start considering these options, then you should also have a look around and see if there are any clinical trials around town. Because, as we will see, the effectiveness of both of these agents is not great. So Sunlight is a study of Lonsurf plus bevacizumab, and already I can hear experienced colorectal oncologists sniggering in the background because Lonsurf does have a certain reputation, shall we say.
Well, that and we're two, peeny little oncologists talking about a study. They're like, I've treated for 37,000 years and my preference is fluoropyrimidine-based.
Again. Re-challenge. And also, this is a fact and it's coming on a podcast, so you know it's true. All senior oncologists talk exactly like Josh just did.
Yes. I'm going to go golfing now.
Yes. Golfing.
If you're a senior oncologist, we love you. Thank you for listening, and we'll stop now.
And when I say we, I think you should direct all of your complaints to Josh Hurwitz at joshhurwitz.nolongerhasajob.com.au. So anyway, Lonsurf. So patients with refractory disease, they sometimes do have good performance status. Colorectal cancer is frequently not like lung cancer where people's performance status rapidly declines. You can have people who are on their 3rd, 4th, 5th line, or in colorectal cancer's case, re-challenge of 5FU-based chemotherapy, and still have good performance status. Now, most patients, when they get to post-5FU country, put on trifluridine-tipiracil, better known as Lonsurf, one of the better or more successful branding exercises in pharmacology, I think. So Lonsurf is a combination of trifluridine, which is a cytotoxic nucleic acid analog, and tipiracil, which is a thymidine phosphorylase inhibitor that prevents the breakdown of trifluridine. So think of it like the chemo version of, I don't know, Targen, maybe, which is oxycodone naloxone. It's approved for refractory metastatic colorectal cancer on the basis of the RECOURSE trial, which showed benefit compared to placebo. So again, we are at that stage where all studies are really comparing to placebo. Sunlight took Lonsurf, the tried and tested, such as it is, and combined it with bevacizumab. And I think, it's not surprising, or it won't be a surprise to say that a lot of patients who have been put on this study would have already had bevacizumab. So it's a re-challenge and a drug that is probably not that effective.
I think we have to say, Michael, that you were just very smooth right then. So Michael, guys, check out YouTube. You can see that transition as he brought up his first slide of the study design. But that was phenomenal. Well done.
Josh, thank you for that. And that is how we do. That is how we do with practice. If you want to see some far less smooth transitions, then maybe go and watch some of our earlier forays into YouTube. It's not pretty. Eligibility criteria for sunlight were obviously unresectable, adenocarcinoma of the colon or rectum. They could have no more than 2 previous chemotherapy regimens with progressive disease or unacceptable toxicity. So no re-challenges. In a lot of these studies, they do count a re-challenge as a subsequent line of therapy, so you could assume that they would have had 2. I don't know why anyone would have gone on to this study only having had 1 line. So, Folfox and then Lonsurf Bev. Doesn't really make sense. Not what you should do. Previous treatment must have included a fluoropyrimidine, 5-FU, irinotecan, oxaliplatin, an anti-VEGF, or an anti-EGFR. And they allowed neoadjuvant or adjuvant chemotherapy if the disease had recurred during or within the first 6 months of the last dose. Patients who received 1-to-1 received Lonsurf plus Bev or Lonsurf alone. And they were stratified according to geographic region, time since diagnosis of first metastases, and the RAS status. The primary endpoint was overall survival, which, Josh, I must say, whenever I see the primary endpoint as overall survival as the main one, I think, we're not expecting miracles with this study, are we? Secondary endpoints were investigator-assessed PFS, overall response rate, and disease control and safety. So, the results, 492 patients were randomized from November 20 to February of 2022. 246 patients were assigned to each group. The median duration of treatment was 5 versus 2.1 months. The relative dose intensity was interestingly slightly higher with Lonsurf alone compared to Lonsurf and Bev, but only by a couple of percentage points. The median overall survival was 10.8 compared to 7.5 months. Hazard ratio of 0.61 and with a p-value of less than 0.001. At 6 months, the survival was 77 compared to 61%. At 12 months, the survival was 43 compared to 30%. So yes, it's better, but it is still dismal. Progression-free survival, likewise very dismal. 5.6 months in the combination arm, 2.4 months in the control arm. And the 12-month progression-free survival, 16% versus 1% with Lonsurf alone. The thing that anyone who's used Lonsurf will know is that it is that awful combination. It's the opposite of immunotherapy, some might say, where you have not very much efficacy and potentially a number of side effects. And the toxicity can be quite bad. There's a reason that it's been relegated to last line. So the most common adverse events of any grade in the combination group were neutropenia, 62%, nausea, 37%, anemia, 28.9%, asthenia, 24%, fatigue, which I've written, Josh, in my notes here as fatigue, which must be something slightly different, but fatigue is 21%, diarrhea is 20%. And 43% of patients had grade 3 or 4 neutropenia, which in my experience is a major barrier to getting people consistently on this drug. So it is a win, such as it is, for Lonsurf plus bevacizumab, and I think there are a lot of places around Australia. It's still not technically PBS reimbursed, but it is available with a little bit of pharmacological flexibility, shall we say, or pharmacy flexibility, where there are some places where you can get access to it, and hospitals will fund it. And if you have a patient who you think can tolerate it, who does have that functional status and that tolerability, then by all means, yes, we know it's better than Lonsurf, and we know that Lonsurf is better than nothing. Unfortunately, we can't really say much more than that. And I think we do need better targets, which we've talked about. If you want to hear more about the targets in colorectal cancer, go back to the previous episodes, because we do address that question as well. And I think we do need better options after this, which leads us, Josh, to admire the wonderful artwork on the fresco of your study. How did I do?
I wonder where you're going for that. Yeah, Carol would appreciate your segue on that point. Carol's Cheryl's sister. She's also listening to this show.
Yes. She has also called in requesting a study.
Yes, they both love Michael, it seems. So we're talking about Fresco 2 here, not Fresco 1, but Fresco 2. So I've already gone through the stats when it comes to colorectal cancer. The current options as of this 2023 publication, after everything Michael said was really Lonsurf, which Michael eloquently said, it's last line, it's got tox, it's better than nothing, but maybe it's not that great, and regorafenib. So it's a big unmet need. Enter fruquitinib. So fruquitinib, for those that don't know, is a highly selective, and I said potential in my notes. Doing well. We're both doing well. But it's potent oral tyrosine kinase inhibitor for the vascular endothelial growth factor receptors number 1, number 2, and number 3.
Some might say it's potentially potent.
Yes, potentially potent. Key regulator of angiogenesis, and which is, of course, associated with tumor growth and metastases. That in itself is not the only driver. Otherwise, we would have solved this issue many moons ago. There was already a Fresco trial. So this drug, I believe, has been available in China since 2018. The Fresco trial showed that after 2 prior lines of therapy, there was an improvement over placebo in overall survival and also an improvement in progression-free survival. But the issue at that point in time is that I don't know what the standard of care was in China, but this is their publication. It was differing to, I guess, the West or the rest of the world. I don't exactly know where you prescribe to if it's not Folfox, Folfiri, with an oxaliplatin sort of base. And so they had to do another study. Thus, Fresco 2. Okay, so that's where we're up to. So it's going to be a relatively similar study, is my suspicion. But what's going to actually happen is it's going to be targeted a little bit more to, I guess, the North American market. This is an international randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled phase 3 trial based at 124 hospitals. They had all received the standard of care treatments, including fluorouracil, oxaliplatin, irinotecan, and probably an anti-VEGF and anti-EGFR therapy. I remember though, now those 2 were not available in the state in China, so you couldn't have had cetuximab or panitumumab because it wasn't available. And they had to have either been intolerant to regorafenib or have disease progression on that and Lonsurf. There were 934 patients assessed, 691 to randomized, 456 to fruquitinib, and 230 to the placebo arm. At the end of the study, 124 remained on the study in the intervention arm and 46 in the control arm, and 20 patients remained on study treatment. If we're looking at endpoints, the primary endpoint was overall survival, and the secondary endpoint was progression-free survival. Not like Michael already said so nicely, we're looking at a late-line therapy here. So we want something, hopefully, And the other secondary endpoints is objective response rate, disease control rate, and duration of control. So the demographics, while I don't have it here, I do have a couple of quick notes. Pretty much over half are over the age of 65, mostly Caucasian, good performance status, majority left colon, about 40%, 20% right colon, and 31% with the rectum, RAS wild type in 30% of both arms as well. There was also BRAF negative in most of the patients and very, very low DMMR. And all of this is implication in survival and treatment options and those sorts of things. So that's quite good. The other really interesting thing, and I couldn't see that so much in your trial, Michael, but I'm sure it's there, at least 70% of patients in both arms had more than 3 lines of therapy, and about 25% had less than 3. So this was a very heavily pre-treated population. Median was about 4 lines. So recruitment occurred during the pandemic, so from 2020 to 2021, and the primary endpoint was met with the median overall survival of 7.4 months versus 4.8 months with a hazard ratio of, you guessed it, 0.66. I don't know why I said it that way, Michael, but there we go. And then
I would be remiss, Josh, in saying, given that you were so kind about my transitions, that your transitions are likewise excellent.
I'm trying very hard this episode because it's been ridiculously bad previously. You can also check that out on our previous on our previous episodes if you want to laugh a little bit. The secondary endpoint was also met with the median progression-free survival of 3.7 versus 1.8 with a hazard ratio of 0.32. This is a really interesting slide. I know it's busy and I stole it from the trial in the Lancet, but I think it's worthwhile talking about. It's about the response. So look, no one had a complete response. Several patients had a partial response. And then if you keep going down, you can see stable disease was also far higher. Most patients, as expected in the placebo arm, progressed. The objective response rate was terrible. And disease control rate was okay, about 56%. So duration of response was 10 months. I'm assuming that's for people that responded versus nothing for the placebo arm. But there was a pretty significant range, as you can see. So that's sort of the trial that in a nutshell. After the study ended, 29 and 34% respectively went on to have additional treatment, which is good. If you look at the subgroup analysis in the overall survival, I won't show that, but everything really favors the use of fruquitinib. And I guess, like Michael said, we don't have much. It's versus a placebo. So adverse events also starting to be important. So most of them weren't grade 3, but the interesting ones are hypertension, asthenia, like Michael spoke about, appetite, diarrhea, hypothyroidism, sort of ranging from high 30% to sort of 20% in that cohort of patients. So look, it's not without its toxicity. And again, late lines of therapy when people are, they say everyone's ECOG 0 to 1. Someone who's had 6 lines of therapy, if you're an ECOG 0, I would, you're a beast. I don't think I've ever met anyone who's managed to, run a marathon. Look, it met its primary and secondary endpoints. There's issues with the trial, like every trial, it's versus placebo. It's slightly better than, let's say, regorafenib. Is similar. Modest was seen in Lonsurf, as Michael spoke about, and maybe Lonsurf and bevacizumab was slightly better. But again, it's hard to really sort of justify using one over the other. I mean, you could always use Lonsurf and then switch to fruquitinib if you've got access to it. But it's about just, I think looking for a trial at this point. That's always my aim. If you've got a trial of something that might be potentially better efficaciousness, then I would go for it.
I would completely agree. And like we said, it is sort of trial territory, shall we say, when you're looking at fruquitinib and Lonsurf. It's sort of similar to, I'm trying to think, when you get to a carbo-gem re-challenge with triple-negative breast cancer, or, you're doing gemcitabine or
Single
vinorelbine.
agent.
Yeah, gemcitabine, single agent, or vinorelbine for lung cancer. It is that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So,
although the counter argument is like for those that do actually respond somewhat well, you can give them 3 months, and we've seen that in small cell. Like we still give immunotherapy over just chemotherapy because you get that 3-month overall survival benefit. So each their own. I think I've never used fruquitinib. It's not really readily available here. But if I had a patient, I would definitely try, or I'd be like, is there something better?
Yeah. And, with regards to what you just said with the availability question, I have it on, well, this is going to sound like I know people. But
Michael knows no one.
I know no one. I barely leave the house, which is something that Josh has tried to change for many years and failed. But one of our clinical pharmacists has mentioned that fruquitinib has gotten a positive recommendation from PBAC, and it should be on the PBS any second now. It's just awaiting the government to do its thing. So I think that really sums it up. Apologies, it's been a bit of a grim episode, but we'll be back next week with more grim stuff. Because number one, it's an oncology podcast, so I'm very rarely going to have happy-go-lucky episodes.
Sunlight.
Exactly. Well done, Josh. But number two, we are talking about esophageal and gastroesophageal junction cancer. It's going to be a bit better than this episode because it's early stage.
Yes.
But esophageal and GOJ cancer and gastric cancer, still a very challenging cancer, challenging tumor stream with few, therapeutic options. But we'll be talking about two of them when we return next week.
Look, it will be a magical episode, Michael, and we'll cross it when we get there.
Nice. We're not talking about magic or cross, but yes, a very topical one.
No, I'm messing with you. We'll see you next week.
See you next week. Thank you for listening to this episode of Oncology for the Inquisitive Mind, produced by ADC Productions, with the assistance of education grants from Pfizer, Gilead Pharmaceuticals, and Merck Pharmaceuticals. As always, these companies do not receive early previews or editorial input of any kind. The opinions expressed in this episode are our own, and the facts are, well, the facts. If you liked this episode, please consider subscribing to be among the first to hear our latest forays into the ever-changing world of medical oncology. You can find previous episodes of our show, including coverage of major conferences, interviews with world-renowned experts, and much more at inquisitiveonc.com. If you would like a particular subject covered on the show, drop us a line at inquisitiveonc@gmail.com. And if you happen to be in Australia, stay tuned for details about exciting in-person events we have planned for the near future. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to demystifying oncology again next time.